Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our global chocolate tasting event for the clients and friends of Presilium Private Wealth. We're excited to spend the next hour with you learning everything chocolate together. We are very grateful to be here with all of you. If you were invited to this event, then you are very important to us. Our life's work is to ensure that all of you reach your financial goals while having an amazing experience along the way. Everything we do at Presilium is done with your success in mind. We continue and remain ready to take advantage of whatever the market and the world gives us next, actively working on your behalf each and every day. Thank you for your trust and friendship. Now, I would like to introduce you to our chocolate expert, Dr. Jessica Henderson, who is going to guide us through an amazing chocolate tasting today. Dr. Henderson is a certified chocolate expert who combines her background in neuroscience and group leadership to host fun and memorable chocolate tasting events. She has now led more than 500 chocolate tasting events, but has assured us that this will be the best one yet. Jessica, thank you for joining us. We've really been looking forward to this event.
Thank you so much. I'm super excited to be back with Presilium with some fantastic new chocolates to share with you all. All right, so now that you've looked through your kit, was there anything that you recognized? Was there anything that stood out to you? What do you think is going to be your favorite? As we go through the chocolates, I'm going to talk a little bit about what affects our experience with the chocolate. And it's not just our taste receptors like most of us think, but it also has to do with our history, our experience. If you have a brand and you've had it before, maybe you have an affiliation for that brand. I believe the fancy psychological term is halo effect. Or maybe you've had a bad experience with a chocolate brand, and then that would be the horn effect. And those affect the way that we have the chocolate. So what I want you to do is kind of look through. If you notice the packaging, all of the packaging is really nice. All of the packaging, they've put a lot of effort into making that first experience with their chocolate brand amazing. So to get started, now that you've kind of looked through everything that you have, I'm going to tell you all chocolate comes from a tree that grows in the tropical rainforest. It grows about 20 degrees north and south of the equator. The people in Hawaii do cheat a little bit. They're at 21 degrees, but they can commercially grow cacao beans. And all of the chocolate trees grow in a tropical rainforest environment. No matter what chocolate you're eating, whether I sent it to you or whether you're getting it someone else, no matter what type of a chocolate it is, how much you paid for it, all of it comes from the tree. The fruit of the tree looks like this. This is a cacao pod, and somebody hand harvests this fruit off of that tree. They then open up the fruit. Inside is some seeds covered in a white sticky pulp. So the seeds would make new tropical chocolate trees. The white part is what people and animals would eat when they could get fresh fruit. To make chocolate, the entire inside part is fermented for about a week and then dried for about a week, at which point it's stable for storage and for shipping. That fermentation and drying process is really important to the final flavor of chocolate, but we're going to skip it so we can actually get to enjoy what's in your kit. Once the chocolate maker gets those cacao beans, the first thing they do is sort through them, make sure there's nothing in there you don't want in your chocolate. Usually they run them through a metal detector just to be safe, that kind of thing. And then they roast the beans. So your first sample is a little roasted bean. The bean itself is in the little white bag with some other little bonuses I put in there for you. So this is a cacao bean. What you're going to do with it is crack it open, peel off the shell, and try a little bit of the inside part, which is called the cacao nib. You might have seen cacao nibs for sale before. This is 100% cacao, no sugar added. And I always start with this because it's interesting to me how we've gone from a tropical fruit to a very bitter, crunchy substance. And somehow we're going to get to the creamy milk chocolates at the end. The other thing I wanted to point out, I don't usually take the time to do this, but those beans, the beans that you have, and yes, there is no sugar, so they might be a little bitter, are from the Tirio Hispaniola region of the Dominican Republic. They were exported by Risette Cacao to me, where I roasted them. And in that, bag of beans, there are a lot of different sizes. I don't know if you can see these two, but these are from the same bag of beans. They came from the same region, and there's this much size difference in those beans inside the cacao pod fruit. So I tried to send you one that was big enough that you could crack it open and peel it pretty easily. So that is 100% cacao, once again, no sugar added. To make chocolate, what the chocolate maker does is they get those beans, they roast them, and then they put them in a grinder. So the exact machine, the time that they grind for, the temperature they grind at, the pressure they grind with, all of that would vary from chocolate maker to chocolate maker. And it might even vary from batch to batch within one chocolate maker's location. But we're just going to average and say they grind it for about 2 days, at which point they add some sugar. They take it out, temper the chocolate so it's nice and shiny, and then pour it into a bar mold. So the first actual chocolate we're going to start with is the Mocha Origins Tanzania. So you should have a bar that looks just like this. So Mocha Origins was started by Jeff Abella and Ishchan Tinkwana. And they actually made like a model farm in the Cameroon. What they're really interested in is creating stable income, which will increase the sustainability of coffee and cacao farms for people in their area. And they get all of the cacao beans from here. You can see it says Tanzania. And if you look a little lower, it says Coco Camili. So Coco Camili is a, what do they call it? A social enterprise is what they call it, that has been set up in Tanzania. And what they are is a central fermentation area. So I said that the fermentation was dry and was really important to the flavor. And so if you can get a lot of mass, you can do a really well controlled fermentation, and that'll give the final cacao beans better flavor, which means the final chocolate bar will have better flavor. So if you haven't already, you can go ahead and open this package. Once you open the inner package, you have some squares. And then what I would do is snap off a square, maybe snap it in half. When you put that chocolate in your mouth, what you want to do is notice the flavor. And I'm saying flavor specifically instead of taste, but I want you to notice what you're getting. You can chew it a few times to kind of get that it started melting, but you really want to notice what is coming up for you. What is it reminding you of? And I like to just start with a completely blank slate, so you can kind of have that first experience on your own. So this is a dark chocolate. The tasty notes that they send along is brandied cherry and citrus. So maybe you got that and maybe you didn't. But now that I've given you some hints of what flavors you might find in the chocolate, you can go ahead and take another bite. And again, I like to say that you wouldn't buy a very expensive bottle of wine or bottle of whiskey and guzzle it like you would a bottle of water. And so when you buy craft chocolate, what you're really paying for, just like those expensive spirits, is you're paying for the flavor. So you don't want to chew and miss it. You really want to move the chocolate around and notice the flavor. There are two little inserts in your kit. One is the chocolate tasting guide. In here, I have a very basic chocolate tasting wheel. So if you're interested in kind of trying to put some names to those flavors, like citrus is on here. I also have roasted spice, floral, nutty, earthy, and fruity. So those are some things that you might notice. If you're interested in really being more specific, then you can use a flavor wheel. So originally, Ann Noble at the UC Davis created an aroma wheel for wine. And that aroma wheel has kind of taken off, and so flavor wheels for pretty much all different foods. You can find flavor wheels for chocolate, for whiskey, for pears was one of the first interesting ones I've seen, for cheese, for just about everything. And there are lots of chocolate flavor wheels, but the one that I personally use is the Counterculture Coffee's flavor wheel. And if you're going to use this, you're going to start in the center. And the center is kind of very similar to the smaller flavor wheel in the insert. And then you're going to notice, okay, well, there was fruit. What type of fruit is it? And you'll go out one more. It's berry or it's dried fruit. And you can stop there if you want, or you can go out and say, is it dried fruit? Is it dried fig? Is it dried banana? Is it dried whatever? So you can use this to kind of put words to the flavors that you're experiencing. So the idea is that the flavor wheel is a tool to help you notice what you're experiencing. It's not supposed to change what you're experiencing, just help you put some words to it to kind of communicate that with people better. All right. The other thing I wanted to point out with this one is it's a 72% bar, which means it's 28% sugar. With craft chocolate, all you get is cacao beans and sugar until we get to some of the inclusions, which are things that are not cacao beans and sugar. But the math is really easy with a nice quality, smooth dark chocolate bar like this one. And the other thing I wanted to say about Coco Camili, which was set up as that central fermentation area, is the cacao trees there are lots of different varieties. They have different flavors, but they also have different growing patterns. So some cacao trees will have a continual harvest, some will have a biannual harvest, and some will have an annual harvest. And in Coco Camili in Tanzania, they have an annual harvest. So the central fermentation area is only open seasonally, and they accept wet beans from the farmers living around the area. And when they buy those beans, they post the price that they're paying for beans right on the gate to their location. And when people come in, that's the price they get. They know the price they're going to get. There's no question about it. There's no bargaining or haggling. And it's usually about 25% above the other prices in the area. So when Coco Camili opens, all of the other places that might buy cacao beans have to raise their prices as well. And the date Coco Camili closes for the season, and they take down that price, and they'll have a new price next year. All of the other places in the area can lower their prices as well. So Coco Camili is not just helping the farmers close to them get a better price for their cacao beans and their labor, but they're actually helping the entire region by posting the price on the gate just like that. All right, so on to our next chocolate bar, which is the Askinosie Raspberry Bar. It says American Spoon on the top. So this is a collab, not boration, but collaboration between Askinosie Chocolate and American Spoon Jam Company. This is the red raspberry bar. And you might notice something else about this chocolate. It has a little bit of pepper in it, which I think it makes it more interesting. It's not just super sweet and just one note fruity. That pepper gives it like a lot of dimension and makes it more interesting in your mouth. This is a 54% chocolate, and it was created by a company called Askinosie, which is Sean Askinosie and his daughter Lauren. Sean wrote a book called Meaningful Work, a quest to do great business, find your calling, and feed your soul. He used to be a trial lawyer. He was very happy with that for a while, and then he found it unfulfilling. And so he transitioned into chocolate making. And one of the things that Sean did when he established his company was he established direct trade with the farmers who were farming the cocoa beans for him. So he was one of the first people to establish that direct trade. He also opens his books and does profit sharing with the people he direct trades with. So he has a very great relationship with them, which is really important. In this case, the farmers are actually fermenting and drying the beans themselves. There's not a central location, but they're still getting paid quite a bit more, typically about 50% above the base price. And every year, Askinosie publishes a transparency report. You can go to their website and look it up and read through it every year. There's all kinds of details on there about everything, how much they pay, how much they buy, who they buy it from, how many farmers they bought from, all kinds of information like that. And this chocolate I particularly like to pair with wine. When I'm pairing chocolate with wine, so if you're going to get out some wine later, if you have some open right now, what I like to do is think about the wine being in the driver's seat and the chocolate is along as a passenger. What we're doing right now, the chocolate is in the driver's seat. I've selected all of this chocolate to give you a really broad appreciation for the chocolate that's out there. And we're tasting it in a specific order from the most dark with that 100% all the way to the most sweet. When I have wine, I let the wine be in the driver's seat. So I might get out the wine, pour a glass, and just kind of notice, the body of the wine, the flavor of the wine, how sweet the wine is. Take a couple of sips, and then I would go try to match it with some chocolate. And the chocolate that I would choose would pretty much balance the sweetness of the wine. If you have a very dry wine, you would not want a very sweet chocolate. That's the rule. Of course, it's always good to break the rules and try to break the rules, but that's the general rule or the recommendation. And then the other thing I would do is match intensity. So if you have like a big, bold tab, it's not going to stand up to a very delicate, mild, chocolate with a lot of nuanced notes. It'll just overpower that chocolate. Similarly, if you have a really, delicate, beautiful Pinot Noir with a lot of nuance to it, and you get a big, bold chocolate, maybe even the bar that you're eating now, because that raspberry is really strong, it might overpower all of the interesting notes in the wine. And so you kind of want to match those intensities. And then the last thing is flavor. So the way that I think about this is when I think about the wine, if you see a word on the back of the wine label, so if you see fruity or you see raspberries, then you would look for a chocolate that would have those same flavor notes. So for example, the one you're eating now is raspberry. If, however, you've decided to open a big, beautiful, buttery Chardonnay from California, and you looked at the back of the bottle, it would not say raspberry. Those two products will not go together well. There will be some things we'll have later that might go with that Chardonnay, but not this bar. And so usually if you think of matching flavors, you can get a really nice pairing. And of course, when you're pairing chocolate with wine, or with any other, spirit or drink, even tea or coffee go well with chocolate, you're looking for something that's more enjoyable than either of the two products separately. So sometimes, if you get out your drink and then you get out your chocolate and you try a couple of things and they were just okay, and it's totally fine to just enjoy them separately the rest of the evening. But if you find something that's better together than it was separately, that's what I would consider a good pair. All right, so on to our next chocolate. This one is from Pump Street. So it's called Sourdough and Sea Salt. Pump Street was originally a bakery out of the UK. They were a chocolatier. So a chocolatier is somebody who uses pre-made chocolate to make delicious things, truffles, bonbons, cakes, pies. I believe they were putting chocolate in croissants because they did a lot of baking. And we wanted a better quality chocolate than they could buy. And so they bought cocoa beans and made their own chocolate, which apparently they're very good at because now they export a lot of chocolate all over the world. So this is part of what they call their bakery series. And in that, what they do is they take some baked goods from the bakery, which is still around, and they put them in the chocolate. This is my personal favorite. It's the sourdough and sea salt in dark chocolate, 66%. But they make quite a few others. The original three were this one in dark chocolate, and then they had a rye bread in milk chocolate, and a brown bread in white chocolate. So when I first experienced Pump Street, I bought all three of them, and I tried each one, and I had people over and my family and friends over, and we tried each one, and everybody kind of had a different favorite, but everybody liked everything. And I couldn't really decide which was my favorite. And then finally, the one that disappeared the fastest was the dark. So this one is my favorite of the three. But if you prefer something other than dark chocolate or you don't like sourdough, one of the others might be your favorite. And then they have a lot of holiday flavors, seasonal flavors, and they just expanded their bakery series. So they have 3 new bars, which are also delicious. I highly recommend Hump Street. This is a father-daughter duo. And just like all of the other craft chocolate I'm going to talk about, it has that transparent, traceable supply chain. So I know where the beans came from. In this case, they came from, it's written right here, Ecuador, Hacienda Limon. So again, if you go to their website, you can click through and find more information about this region of Ecuador if you're more interested in how many beans they use, how much they paid for them, all kinds of information like that. All right. So our next dark chocolate sort of looks like a milk chocolate. So this is the little Rocca. It's the little bonus. I put it in the white bag. So Rocca is a company out of New York, and they're famous for not roasting their cacao beans. And so I kind of told you the basic process, but there are always somebody who's changing the process just a little. And this is one of the companies doing that, which is they don't roast the cacao beans. They steam clean them so they're safe to eat. And because they don't roast them, the beans have a more fruity flavor and it's much more intense. So less processing means more of that original intense flavor stays intact. So some people really like that. And to other people, it's just a little too much for them. It's a little too strong for them. So the one I sent is from Rocca's non-dairy milk collection. So it says oat milk on here. What that really is oat powder. And then it does say it in the ingredient list, but because it's hard to read, I just want to mention there is coconut powder in here as well. That's one of the sweeteners and the things that make it really creamy. I hope everybody's enjoying this one. You might have noticed right when you open the package that it has a very distinct smell. And one of the things that this bar does is they use maple syrup instead of white cane sugar. And that's why I personally love this one. To me, it tastes very reminiscent of like a maple oatmeal, and I like it quite a bit. So this is not a milk chocolate. It's because it doesn't have any dairy milk in it, but it's creamier like a milk chocolate would be because of that oat and coconut milk powder. And then if you look at the inside of the wrapper, you get, once again, that commitment to transparent trade. So the idea behind transparent trade is not that transparent trade is the goal. It's that when you have that transparency, there can't be, unethical labor practices happening behind the scenes because everything is transparent and upfront. You'll notice that this one says the origin is Simaluki Forest. So Simaluki Forest is one of the places that a lot of chocolate companies get their beans from, and it's operated by Latitude Trade Corporation, which is a B corporation, which B corporations have to pass a lot of different benchmarks on sustainability and ethics before they can get that label. And the next one that we have here is the mocha origin. So this is the last one in the little bonus white bag. And so when you open that one, you might also notice, so mine won't open, but it's also from the same location. It's from Simaluki Forest as well in Uganda. So I want you to kind of compare this Rocca chocolate, which they did some interesting things to. They made it super creamy and they added maple instead, to the one from Mocha Origins, which we already talked about who Mocha Origins was. But in this case, they're adding a little bit of dairy milk to some cocoa beans that they ground from Uganda. This one has a percentage of 49. So the other 51% is the sugar and the dairy milk powder. And then this is a lot more chocolate flavor than you would find in your typical, what you would call industrial or commodity or grocery store chocolate. The legal minimum amount of cocoa beans that you need to have in a bar of chocolate to call it chocolate here in the US is 10%. So a lot of times when you go into the grocery store and you see something with the word chocolate on it, it means that it didn't meet that 10% minimum. or that it just met that 10% minimum, because cocoa beans are the most expensive part of a chocolate product. And so they want to use the least amount of them that they can. With industrial commodity chocolate, a lot of times they'll use other things as well. Sometimes they'll actually press out the cocoa butter part of the cacao nib mixture in the grinder, and they'll replace that with vegetable oil, soybean oil. And that's another way for them to cut costs. They can sell the cocoa butter to different industries, and then they can use a cheaper product and still get, a brown colored chocolatey flavored thing. So hopefully this one tastes sort of like a dark chocolate because it has so much cocoa beans in it. And that's that 49%. So they're calling it a dark milk. Those are not legal terms. There's no legal terms defining those two. So some dark chocolate in the grocery store will have milk powder in it. Hershey's Special Dark is the one I always use as an example. Hershey's Special Dark, when I was growing up, was one of my favorites. And then I recently, well, not recently, a couple of years ago, learned that there's milk powder in that product. So technically it's a milk product, but it's not what it says on the front. And then usually, again, we're at that 10%. If a product doesn't meet that 10% minimum, they tend to call it chocolate tea or chocolate flavored. Now, I don't recommend those products. They're typically extremely cheap, but I did just do a tasting recently comparing some white chocolates, where if you go into the store, Nestle, everybody thinks they're white chocolate chips, but if you look closely at the package, it just says baking chips, Nestle baking chips. There's actually no chocolate, there's no cocoa beans, there's no cocoa butter, there's no chocolate in those chips. And they were incredibly different when you feel them in your mouth. So we have some white chocolate in the tasting at the end, so you can compare those. If you have any of those baking chips in your pantry, you can compare the way they melt in your mouth, and it feels completely different. All right, so we're going to take a small break now. And I have a little activity that I include in all of my kits that go to everyone with Jelly Bellies. And this is a little activity to show you that what you think of as flavor, as taste, is really a lot of aroma too. So if you'd like to do the activity, and I'll give you some time to do it, what you're going to do is open your pack of jelly beans. You're going to take out one jelly bean. I don't care what color it is, as long as it isn't red. Can't use a red one. And what you're going to do is hold your nose shut, completely shut, or it doesn't work. You're going to put the jelly bean in your mouth. You're going to chew a few times and ask yourself, what am I tasting? What flavor Jelly Belly is this? You're going to release your nose. You're going to finish chewing your jelly bean and breathing in and out of your nose exactly like you normally would. I'll take a sip of water here while you do that. So what should happen is, the reason that I love to use Jelly Bellies is because they really are just a sugar center with a lot of liquid flavorants poured onto them. All of that is easily accessible on Jelly Bellies' website. They'll show you how they make their jelly beans. But because it's just a sugar center, when you put the jelly bean in your mouth and you have your nose pinched shut, you're using only your taste and feel receptors in your mouth. So you feel there's something there, you start to chew, and really you're using the 5 taste receptors: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami. And with Jelly Bellies, you just get sweet. Now, if you happen to pick a very fruity flavor, they might have put some acid in there, so you might get some sour. And if you had picked a red one, even though I told you not to, or I suggested you not, what you might actually feel that, because the red ones are either cherry or cinnamon. And if you got a cinnamon one, you would have noticed the flavor in your mouth, because cinnamon is actually a feel. It's mediated by the temperature sensing receptors in your mouth, and those are sensitive to heat. They're sensitive to actual temperature. They're sensitive to black pepper. They're sensitive to all of the chili peppers. and they're sensitive to spices like cinnamon. So that's why we call cinnamon a warming spice. And we would say that chili peppers are hot because we're actually feeling heat in our mouth, even though, of course, there is no change in temperature in our mouth. If you had a mint jelly bean, or if you have a peppermint during Christmas time, mint is also something that we feel. That one's actually mediated by our cool sensing receptors. So when you put something minty in your mouth, you feel like the temperature of your mouth drops. It feels refreshing. That's why gum is often minty, but it's not actually changing the temperature of your mouth. So if you didn't get hot or cold ones, all you really get with jelly beans is sugar. And then as soon as you release your nose, you breathe out, pull the air out of your mouth. It comes out your nose and you smell the food that's in your mouth. The fancy word is retronasal olfaction, but it really just means that all of those volatile odorants are being picked up by your nose now. And that's where a lot of the flavor of food comes from. So flavor as a whole is not just about using your taste receptors in your mouth. It's about using all of your senses. The way the package feels in your hands when you break open a chocolate or you snap a chocolate bar, you hear that auditory information. The visual look of the chocolate or the food, any food you're eating, all of that comes into play. But a lot of times when we're appreciating something in our mouths, we talk about the way it tastes, but really what we mean is it smells a certain way. And because we don't have a lot of words to describe the things we smell, we often say it reminds us of something else. So you might say this chocolate reminds me of citrus, or it reminds me of dried orange peel, if you're being more specific. But really what happens is it's not the taste of the chocolate. That's all aroma. So this experiment where you plug your nose, you can do with wine. I've seen it done many times in the wine industry where people hold their nose and try to drink the wine with the glass. It's a little difficult, but you can do it. You can also do it with chocolate. If you do it with an apple and a potato, you actually can't tell the difference. But what I like about it is that it just shows you that not everything is happening in the mouth. All right. I hope you all have some questions for me at the end. I love talking about flavor. That's one of my most exciting things. So we're going to go to another milk chocolate here. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the Presilium bar. This is a milk chocolate that is more typical of what you might find in the grocery store. And if you look at the first ingredient here, it's milk chocolate, which just means that the person that made this packaging didn't actually grind the beans. They bought pre-made chocolate. So we've already talked about that in relation to Pump Street was doing that at first. This company does that also. So there's nothing inherently bad about buying pre-made chocolate. But if you look at this one, the first ingredient is sugar. So this one is going to be a lot sweeter than all of the chocolates we've had so far. I don't know the percentages on this one. It didn't tell me. But if you like sweet chocolate, this one might be your favorite. And also the thing about chocolate is most of us had chocolate when we were young children. And so it has a very nostalgic, comforting effect. And sometimes what we want when we want chocolate is that nostalgia. And we don't necessarily want something that's really dark and interesting and challenging like this. Sometimes we want something that's sweet and reminiscent of what we grew up with, which would be more like this bar. So I know sometimes it can sound like I am a chocolate snob because I do specialize in craft chocolate, but I'm not. I think that you should eat the chocolate that you enjoy. And I just wanted to point out the difference is that this one will be much sweeter than the other ones because it doesn't have as much cacao beans and it has quite a bit more sugar. The other thing that's important when you eat something sweet is your mouth gets very used to those sweetness, and then you need something equally sweet to feel sweet again. So if you decided to eat something very sweet and then eat something not as sweet, you would not experience any sweetness with this product. So that's why we always taste in order from the least to the most sweet. If you want to do that experiment, go ahead. It's kind of interesting. And that's why when we judge things in competition, we need to do things in a specific order so as not to bias our palates by what we just had before. All right, so now we're going to go to some sweet bars. This is on my list here. Cherry Nibbler is what it's called. It's a 50% dark milk chocolate. So again, we're at 50%, so we've got quite a bit of cocoa beans in there. And dark milk is not a legal term. It just means that there's a high percentage of cocoa beans and there is milk powder. This one is called the Cherry Nibbler because there's little pieces of cherry and there's little nibs on this chocolate. And this one is made by a husband and wife team, John and Kristen Mohagan, out of Michigan, I believe. And I absolutely love their tiny little packaging. This is another one that would go well with wine, with a red wine, because it has that cherryness to it, that cherry flavor. And then we'll move on to J. Coco. So this is probably, even though it's not the last one, it's probably the sweetest bar in the lineup. And that's because it has toffee in it as well. So J. Coco is one of my favorite chocolate brands. It was started by Jean Thompson, who was an investor in the Seattle Chocolate Company. When there was an earthquake that destroyed the building, she was the only one that wanted to rebuild Seattle Chocolate Company, so she became the owner. She said she's been very open about the struggle she had learning not only chocolate, but learning a business at all. She was in the tech industry prior. And so she has kind of built up Seattle Chocolate Company, is doing well, very well. So she spun off this sister brand, which is J. Coco. This one, if you read, it says in Peruvian milk chocolate. So J. Coco is also not a bean to bar chocolate maker. They buy all of their chocolate pre-made from a company in Peru called Cacao Suyo, which might sound familiar to you. You might have seen some Cacao Suyo bars. They're one of the most award-winning chocolate makers in the world. So that's where she sources the base chocolate for all of the bars in the J. Coco line. And then she, adds different inclusions and all kinds of interesting things. This one is a 47%. So 47% of this product is cocoa beans. And then it's some salt and some toffee. And that toffee is what makes this one super sweet. It's one of my favorite. Like if I want something super sweet, this is one of the bars that I reach for. Jean Thompson also has a TED Talk out called Imagine a World Without Chocolate, where she talks about the sustainability issues in the cacao industry. It's about 15 minutes long, so we're not going to watch it tonight or today, but it's a really good introduction to that concept. And the idea is that if you're consistently putting pressure on people to pay them as little as possible for the cocoa beans, then eventually they're going to do something else. They're going to leave farming, or they're going to rip out those trees and plant some products, some crops that will get them more money. Most cocoa beans around the world are farmed in what they would call small-scale family farms. So usually it's not like one small family, but it's like a larger family group, and they own land. They use that land to grow things that they can feed their family with and grow things that they can sell, usually all together. And that's how cocoa trees grow best. They grow best in that agroforestry kind of system where there's lots of diversity in the rainforest. But because, people are growing this on their family property and they're really just doing whatever they do with the beans, sometimes they sell wet beans, sometimes they ferment and then sell dry beans, that they're doing this at such a small scale, they don't necessarily have a lot of economic power, and they sell to whoever comes along and buys the beans from them. So if you're consistently paying less money for those beans, the farmers will do what makes most sense for them, which is to farm a different crop that they can make more money with. So that's kind of the idea behind sustainability, is that we need to pay people enough money to keep the cacao trees on their land and to keep farming those fruits and selling people the beans so that they can make delicious and wonderful chocolate with it. So this is one of my favorite delicious and wonderful chocolates. Like I said, I reach for it a lot when I want something sweet. So that is the end of the milk chocolates. what I wanted to end with is a white chocolate. So when you take those cacao nibs and you put them in the grinder and you grind them up, you get kind of a peanut butter paste consistency product. And that's because there's a fat naturally present in the beans called cocoa butter. That fat, when it gets warm, becomes liquid. That fat cocoa butter is what is solid at room temperature. So you have a chocolate bar, and that's what melts on your tongue when you put a chocolate bar in your mouth. So it's that fat releasing all of the flavor that gives chocolate that amazing melt. So the cocoa butter is in the beans. When you put the beans in the grinder, they form a paste. They call it a chocolate liqueur. There's no alcohol in it. But you get that and sometimes it's very smooth and sometimes it's not, because the amount of fat in the beans varies by the genetic varietal of the cacao tree and by the environmental conditions that year. And so you never know exactly how much cocoa butter is going to be in your cacao beans. But then what you can do is take a big hydraulic press and press out that liquid cocoa butter. What's left in the grinder is the cocoa powder. That's what we would typically bake with. And then the cocoa butter can either be added back to other chocolate to make it even more silky smooth. Sometimes makers do that. You can sell it to the cosmetics industry, or you can make white chocolate from it. So white chocolate is made from cocoa butter, which came out of the beans, which came from the tree. So I personally consider white chocolate real chocolate. There is also a legal definition of white chocolate. So legally, it is real chocolate. But there are still people in the chocolate industry who don't consider it real chocolate because it doesn't have those cocoa solids in it. So you can form your own opinion. I won't argue any more than that. But what I have here is a batch by another husband-wife team called Lumino. This is Ben and Becca Snyder. These are the exact same chocolate bars. I bought one batch a while ago. It has the 3 blue things. It's called Cocoa Nib White Chocolate, and I just bought this batch recently, and they changed the packaging, which small chocolate makers do frequently. And this one just says micro batch on it, and it says the same thing, Cocoa Nib White Chocolate. But micro batch is when they make a very small or limited quantity, they want to kind of identify that. So that's what they're just changing their packaging. But it's the exact same chocolate inside. It's a creamy white chocolate with some cocoa nibs in it. And this is my favorite way to enjoy white chocolate. There are lots of makers who make this white chocolate with nibs on top. And it's a really nice contrast of the smooth, sweet, creamy white with the crunchy nibs on top. The last thing I wanted to say about Volumino is the cocoa butter, or the beans the cocoa butter was pressed from, came from the Dominican Republic. So we've really gone full circle here in that the bean I gave you, I'm not sure where mine went, but the bean I gave you was from the Dominican. The cocoa butter in this was from the Dominican. And again, with craft chocolate, what sets it apart from other types of chocolate is that it has a lot more flavor and it has that transparent, traceable supply chain. Craft chocolate is about 2% of the global chocolate industry, so it's a very tiny minority. All of the bars are in that top 2% of flavorful chocolate available right now. And some of them are even more rare, especially the ones that are micro batch or the ones that are no longer made anymore. So I see a poll has been popped up here, which was, what was your favorite? And my favorite thing about this poll is that there's a vote for at least one vote for every chocolate I set, which is what I love about chocolate. Everybody experiences the same food differently. Nobody experiences the chocolate exactly the same way. And thus, when you have a favorite with what you enjoy, it really all comes down to personal preference. And nobody is right and nobody is wrong. But everyone has their own experience with their chocolate and their own favorite. And I like to appreciate the diversity within our experiences. There is a winner. Well, there's kind of tied here. It looks like the 72% dark from Tanzania and the J Coco Himalayan Salt and Toffee are tied. That with the about 30% here. Oh, now somebody else has voted, so we're a little higher on one. But I'm going to consider that a tie. But at least every chocolate got it.
Coming down the home stretch here.
Yes, that was it with me. I love this poll. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and then open it up for questions. Do you have any questions?
Excellent. While we're waiting for any questions to come in, Jessica, I guess from our perspective, especially as someone who stays a little bit more mainstream in the things that you can find at your grocery store, where are the best places or marketplaces to go about finding these? And for those of us who might be looking to add these to our regular rotation.
So if you want to add these to your regular rotation, what I usually say is anything that is made in the US, the best place to buy it from is the maker itself. So Askinosie has a website, askinosie.com, and you can buy it directly from them. If it's made outside of the US, it's not typically worth dealing with customs. I can promise you I deal with customs a lot, just for one bar. And so you probably want to buy it from a distributor. Also, if you want a larger collection, if you don't want 10 bars from Askinosie, you want a large collection, you can buy from a distributor. The one that I've worked with closely is Caputo's. And in fact, I have a tasting that I will be a participant with Caputo's this afternoon. It's a professional tasting of 4 bars from Fuwan Chocolate out of Taiwan. Fuwan is a chocolate maker who's doing some interesting things like double fermenting his beans or adding, the yeast that you would ferment wine with into the fermentation when they're fermenting the beans and that kind of thing. So I do have a special place in my heart for Caputo's, but there are some others. If you just type the name of the chocolate you want into Google, it'll come up with several places to buy it. I don't typically recommend Amazon, especially this time of year, because Amazon will not ship on ice. They're very, very quick, but they don't use ice. And so if it's hot where you are, you will get melted chocolate. There are some chocolate makers that sell their own products on Amazon. They ship the product and they will ship on ice, but because Amazon is taking some of their money, they just charge more on Amazon than they would straight off their website. So it's still better to go to their website.
Excellent.
Awesome.
And we have a few other questions coming in. The first of which is, what is your opinion of 100% chocolate? I guess in general, the person followed up with, they find it very bitter, but curious on your opinion.
So 100% chocolate is bitter. There's no getting around that. Sometimes I can eat the nibs straight, just a little bit of them as a snack. You can also put those, with your ice cream or your gelato, your acai bowl, anything like that, to kind of give some crunch to something that's very sweet. It works well. With 100% chocolate bars, legally, I just want to say legally, there is no such thing. The legal definition of what chocolate does require some sugar. So once you hit 99.9, everything under is chocolate, everything over has to be labeled cacao. So you would have 100% cacao bars. Most chocolate makers find that consumers don't know what cacao is or cocoa, so they just put 100% chocolate and hope the FDA won't come after them. So you might find some out there that say that. I want to like 100% chocolate. I buy a lot of 100% chocolate, and what I do is I'll buy from one maker. I'll buy their 70% bar from a certain region and the 100% bar from those same beans. I'll try them side by side, really just to notice how much the sugar changes the flavor. So I want to like 100% chocolate, but I personally do not. And so usually what I do after I'm done with my side-by-side comparison, which is kind of an academic exercise, in order to enjoy the rest of that 100% bar I paid quite a bit of money for, I make it into a drinking chocolate. Just melt some of it down, add as much liquid as you want or not. And then you can add as much sugar as you want or add any other flavorings.
Excellent. Our next question is from John and Sue regarding the very high cocoa prices that we've been seeing recently, and just curious how that will impact these specialty chocolate companies going forward.
Yeah. So what's really interesting is I noticed this when we had COVID, when the world shut down. It actually took about 2 years for those, higher prices and that disruption to kind of come through in the prices. And it'll be the same with the high prices for cocoa beans right now. So right now, like I'm buying pre-made chocolate. Chocolate makers are making that from beans that they have in their warehouse, and they're going to buy their beans either from the farmers or from a distributor who's got about a year's supply of beans as well. So we're hoping that in the 2 years it takes to kind of trickle down, that the price stabilizes a little bit and it comes down. There are a lot of reasons for that super high price, which there are like hour-long information. That's a whole nother topic. There are a lot of reasons they all came together and made that price so high. Cocoa beans are traded on the commodity market. So a lot of those are in futures, and it's not the real price of beans. I know that there are some farmers who have reported that would actually make more selling to a large chocolate company than they would selling to a craft chocolate maker, at the contract price that they have. Most craft chocolate makers have just stepped up and said, we understand that there's some volatility. We will pay you more this year because we want to continue that relationship that we've developed with you. The other thing is, in craft chocolate, where you have high percentage bars like 70%, you might see more of a jump in price. In candy bars, where it's right there at 10%, you're not going to see that much of a jump in price, because even though there's so many candy bars made, that one ingredient is only 10% of what goes into that product.
That makes sense. One other question from our friends Jill and Paul, they said, or they asked, are there any other companies that offer the unroasted bean chocolate? They really like the fruitiness of that.
I'm trying to think, not off the top of my head. It's Raka, and then there are several companies that will offer like a roasted and unroasted right next to each other. Mashpee out of Ecuador is the one that I typically use, although to be honest, their quality is kind of inconsistent. So sometimes it's really good and sometimes not so much. But it is interesting to have the same beans roasted and unroasted. The other product, I might have one. No, I don't have one laying around here. The other thing that has that really fruity intensity is Taza, Taza. And that's one that you can find at higher end grocery stores like Earth Fare, Whole Foods. Taza, it does roast their beans, but they don't grind them as fine. So it has a very rustic is the word they use. I use sandy. It has a sandy texture. But because, it's that same idea, though, is less processing, is more of that, more intense fruity flavor.
Excellent. A few more here, but the next question is around the Hue bars. I believe, have you tried the Hue bars? And seem to be in Whole Foods, but perhaps not very healthy.
I don't know anything about their nutrition, and I try to stay away from questions about chocolate nutrition because it is about half fat in that bean. And then most people, even the craft chocolate, add quite a bit of sugar. So I believe that we're eating chocolate as for enjoyment. We're eating it for pleasure. Yep. We're not eating it for nutrition, even though it might have some nutrition. The cacao nibs are a superfood. They have lots of antioxidants and heart healthy properties. So if you enjoy the taste of the Hue food bars, please go ahead and enjoy them. I believe they were quite transparent with a lot of their ingredients, where they got things, how they made things. I believe they've been bought by one of the large food companies. The large food companies are letting them do things the way they were doing it before, but it's no longer a small operation like it was.
Interesting. Take a last couple here, but is global warming affecting cacao trees or their health and growth in the farming regions?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go see the Gene the Gene Thompson talk if you are interested in it. What's basically happening is as global warming is happening, it's kind of shifting where cacao trees grow best. So they're going to higher elevations or to outside of the very narrow places where they do grow at. So sometimes, individual farmers right on the edge might see problems with their crop. Other people might not have been able to grow trees, and now they can. So it's definitely shifting the growing areas.
Interesting. And this kind of nice segue into Mike's question about could you grow the cacao tree in the U.S., but maybe answering that question, but also what are some of the better areas or best areas?
Only in Hawaii can you grow it in the U.S.
That counts.
And if I highly encourage everyone, if you go to Hawaii, go to a cacao farm. The way they grow trees in Hawaii is very different than the way they grow them in a lot of more equatorial countries, because they have to deal with winds and slightly different. It's a different climate altogether, but wind is the main way. They need to put a lot of wind breaks in Hawaii, whereas in Peru, not so much wind, so they don't need that. You can grow one in your home if you give it the right conditions. My friend Ben Rasmussen at Potomac Chocolate, he is a one-man chocolate shop. He has a cacao tree that's, I think, maybe 8 years old at this point, and it has some flowers to it, and he has to hand pollinate the flowers to get little pods. In Florida, they have some. You can grow some cacao trees there in South Florida. The thing is, you can't really grow them commercially. And then, of course, I know several greenhouses around me that have a cacao tree. So if you go to a greenhouse or a garden, wherever you are, they probably have a cacao tree.
That makes sense. And then our last two, which I'll combine here, but what kind of chocolate do you use for baking? And more specifically, which I'm especially interested in, do you have a recommendation for the best chocolate to use when baking chocolate chip cookies?
Oh, that's a very difficult question. I don't bake as much as I used to. So usually when I bake, I will use something that is a little bit easier to obtain. Guittard is an American company. That's usually what I use when I bake. If I'm doing something super special, I will use French Broad Chocolates Company. They make adorable little chocolate chips, but they do have they're from Peru. They have a fruity flavor to them. And so to me, as much as I love the fruity flavor of an interesting chocolate to pair it with, wine or spirits, to me, fruity flavors don't really go well in chocolate. Brownies, you can get away with that a little bit more. I know Dandelion in San Francisco has a brownie flight where they make brownies from 3 different single origin chocolates. And of course, the chocolate tastes different, so the brownies taste different. I also don't necessarily think you need to buy single origin chocolate bars and make brownies. It's be like $100 pan of brownies. So I use the chips, and a few makers make chips. Raka, we already mentioned Raka. Raka has some baking chips if you like that unroasted fruity flavor. And then Dandelion, I already mentioned them. They sell incredibly expensive, beautifully geometric. I forget what they call them, but they're basically fancy big chocolate chips.
Excellent.
So, yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Jessica. That was an amazing presentation. And as a chocolate lover, I'm certainly looking forward to adding some of these varieties to my rotation alongside my Hershey bars. But thank you, everyone else, for joining us as well. We loved spending time with you while we learned something new, especially something as delicious as that was. And thank you for continuing to be great ambassadors for our firm as well. So many of you have introduced us to your family and friends, and that really means a lot. And we've loved working with them. So please continue to use us as a resource for anyone important to you. We're continuing to grow here at Presilium, and always interested in meeting more people like you all. So thanks again, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Have a great day.